Welcome to another interesting episode of Science and Innovation History, where we spotlight happenings and inventions in Africa. Today we'll be looking at the story of electricity in Africa. But before that, let's go on a quick break. When we return, you'll be finding out how electricity indeed came to your country or your continent. Welcome to Science and Innovation History, and today we'll be looking at electricity in Africa. My name is Chinatu Oji, and I'll be taking you down this journey. When we think of electricity's birthplace, we imagine Victorian London or Edison's America. But what if I told you that just months after New York City first glowed with electric lights, a remote mining town in South Africa was doing the same? Yeah, you heard me. This is the untold story of electricity in Africa. It is a tale of innovation, colonial exploitation, and a modern struggle that continues to shape the continent's future. In 1882, while most of the world still relied on gas lamps and candles, the mining town of Kimberley in South Africa became the first municipality in Africa to install electric lights. The coal-fired power station that powered this light was only the second of its kind in the entire world, following New York's Pearl Street station by mere months. This wasn't a fluke. Within the next 15 years, electricity spread rapidly across South Africa. Pretoria switched on its electric lights on the streets in 1892. Johannesburg followed in the same year. Durban lit up in 1897, and by 1915, South Africa boasted of the largest power supply system in the entire British Empire. The electricity generated at Victoria Falls exceeded the combined consumption of London, Birmingham, and Sheffield. But why South Africa? Why so early? Well, that answer lies beneath the ground: diamonds and gold. The mining industry needed massive amounts of it to extract the continent's wealth, and so Africa's electric age began not for its people, but for its resources. Meanwhile, in West Africa, a different story was unfolding. African students in Lagos had been learning about electricity since the 1860s. The tin electric light on ships docked in the harbor throughout the 1880s. The knowledge was always there. The awareness was there, but was there an infrastructure? Well, that would take much longer because colonialism tightened its grip on Africa throughout the early 20th century. The pattern established in Kimberley repeated across the continent. Electricity followed the mines, the plantations, and the colonial administrative centers. It rarely reached African communities. And so, in the 1950s, there was a construction of massive hydroelectric projects that should have transformed the continent. For instance, the Kariba Dam rose between what is now Zambia and Zimbabwe, one of the world's largest at the time. In Uganda, the Owen Falls Dam harnessed the power of the Nile. These were very engineering marvels, capable of powering entire nations, but they weren't built for nations. They were built for copper companies and mineral processors. They were built to keep the extractive colonial economy humming. By the end of the colonial period, there was virtually no electricity access outside major cities. And even with those cities, household access remained severely limited for African residents. The infrastructure existed, but it served the wrong masters. So when independence swept across Africa around 1960, new nations now inherited electrical grids designed for extraction, not development, designed for the few and not for the many. You'd think that independence would actually change everything, and in many ways it did. But electricity access, that proved far stubborn. So between 2001 and 2005, over half of sub-Saharan African countries saw their economies grow by more than 4.5% annually. This was the African Renaissance everyone had been waiting for. But here's the catch. During that same period, electricity generation capacity grew at only 1.2% per year. The economy was racing forward while the light struggled to keep up. Today, Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest electricity access rate in the world. As a matter of fact, in some remote regions, fewer than 1 in every 20 households has electricity. In Malawi, Ethiopia, Niger, and Chad, less than 2% of rural populations have access to electrical power. Think about that for a moment. In 2025, you and I can send data around the world in milliseconds, but millions of people in Africa still live without the basic electricity that Kimberly enjoyed in 1882. And even where the grid exists, reliability is a different story. Manufacturing sectors across the continent lose power an average of 56 days per year. That's nearly 2 months of darkness. So try running a business, try keeping vaccines cold, try studying for school exams after sunset. Yes, perhaps, the cruelest irony. Africa is such a net energy exporter. The continent sits on vast reserves of oil, natural gas, coal and renewable energy potential. In fact, it exports energy to the world while its own people still live in darkness. No wonder, between 2020 and 2022, electricity usage in Africa increased by over 100%, and much of it was powered by gas-fired stations. That sounds like progress, right? And in many ways, we can say it is. But the fundamental question remains, who gets the power? Because what we can see today is that the colonial pattern persists in new forms. So industrial zones light up while nearby villages remain dark. Luxury hotels blaze with electricity while surrounding neighborhoods experience rolling blackouts. The infrastructure still serves extraction and elite consumption more than equitable development. Yet, perhaps, there's reason for hope. Solar technology is becoming cheaper and more accessible, offering the possibility of leapfrogging the traditional grid entirely. Mobile money systems that revolutionized African banking are now enabling pay-as-you-go solar systems. Communities are now taking electrification into their own hands. So from Kimberley's pioneering light in 1882 to today's solar revolution, Africa's relationship with electricity has not been about technology. In fact, it has been about power in both senses of the word, electrical power and the power to decide how that electricity serves communities. The continent that helped light the modern world, that provided the gold and diamonds and copper that powered global industry, that even possessed electric power station ever built. This continent still struggles for universal access to the very technology it helped pioneer. But the story isn't over. Every solar panel installed on a rural roof today, every mini-grid powering a previously dark village, every young African engineer designing new solutions, permit me to say that these are the new chapters being written right now. So Africa's electric story began, surprisingly, 143 years ago. But perhaps its next chapter will surprise us just as much, not by serving extractive industries of foreign interest, but by finally fulfilling electricity's democratic promise, light and power for all who have need of it. The question isn't whether Africa will be fully electrified. It is whether, this time, the infrastructure will serve the people who call this continent home. That's the much you can take on this edition of Science and Innovation History. Do well to tell us what you think about this history of electricity in Africa. What do you want us to talk about on our next episode? What history in Africa should we focus on? Do well, reach out to us across the different social media platforms, and of course, drop a comment, and next we will take it from there. My name is Chinatu Oji, and it's bye for now.